Gonzalez-Neal.
I am Shea Mackin. Is everybody today?
I know, today is August 6th. I can't believe we're already in August.
Getting close to school starting all over the country.
Jeez, it's just crazy how time flies, and some of us are like, what do we do? You know, it's like, it's already here.
Yeah, it's coming. It's really getting down to the wire for everybody.
And I know here in Houston, we're particularly hot. Here it's like 95 degrees. I don't know how it is over there in Austin area.
Oh yeah, right around that, at least 95. I mean, we've been having around 98 for days, so it's hot. But I'm inside, and I'm blessed to have AC, so I'm good.
And the fan going, and you know, you can't have a house without a fan in Texas. We are actually very excited to bring in our next guest. Her name is Ms. Stephanie Davidson. Not only is she has an awesome background, and I don't want to say we've been saying long time special education teacher, but I have to say she's a seasoned teacher. I like that.
Yeah.
You know, seasoned, you know, I love that. So we're going to bring her aboard so that we can talk about our individual education plans for our students going back on distance learning.
Right. Yeah. When we were trying to figure out, topics y'all might want to hear about, IEPs is one we're hearing from parents. How do IEPs work during distance learning as we're going into the fall? And so we figured we'd bring in somebody who knows a lot more than we do.
So further ado, we like to bring in our guest, Ms. Stephanie Davidson.
Hey, you are muted. When they brought you over, it automatically muted you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, loud and clear.
Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be your guest today. I was able to teach a couple of Wendy's nieces over a period of 7 years while working at charter school here in Houston. So we got to be good friends. We talked a lot, and I knew Wendy's son, who was also a student at our school. So as she said, I've had quite a lot of experience. I taught for 39 years in both general and special education, and I taught preschool through 12th grade. I taught a variety of issues of emotionally disturbed children in a self-contained classroom, deaf children, lots of learning disabled children, and I also have a deaf daughter. So I have sat on both sides of the table concerning IEPs, and I want parents to realize they have a lot of rights as parents. But of course, this thing we're going through now is something nobody's ever been through before. So we just have to take it a day at a time and try to do the best we can.
Right, and be patient with everybody as we're trying to figure it all out, but know your rights as a parent and know your kids' rights so that you can, chug away and work towards getting them what they need for sure.
One of the issues is probably the time that the student gets services as a special education student, because if you're not in person in school, and so many students are not. I have friends in California, they're not going back in person yet.
Right.
Virginia, they're not going back yet. Mm-hmm. We're not here in Houston. I have a grandson in the big district, HISD, and they won't be back until later in October. So everybody with an IEP is wondering, how can I get this implemented for my child, and how are they working with this? One district I know is actually doing Zoom time with the special education teacher.
Really?
So instead of trying to support a student who is in the regular classroom,
right,
they are going on at a separate time during the day and having a Zoom time with that child, or perhaps that child and another child, depending on the age of the child and what the IEP says. Many IEPs have some similar components, and working with the child in that way. And it's a way to get those minutes in.
That's awesome.
That is great.
It takes this enormous amounts of communication.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to talk to your district, because all districts are different.
Right.
And some districts are bringing in their special education students because they want them to have that in-person education. And then, like I know down in Fort Bend County, where I live, south of Houston, they're bringing kids into the cafeteria or the library with little plastic study carols, and the
Right.
kid has to wear his own mask and bring his own lunch. But those kids can go in and have some face-to-face time with a teacher and a special education teacher because they might need a little bit more than a regular ed student would need. So that's
Right.
one thing that some districts are doing. I thought that was pretty innovative.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. For sure. I heard Representative Dan Huberty was
Mhm.
really vying to get our special needs kids some face-to-face time, not, through a screen. He knows how important that aspect is.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
we've got some people fighting for that as well.
I mean, it's been very difficult. I know, like my youngest sister, she's dealing with that. My nephew's autistic, so she had firsthand on it. She's like, oh my goodness, and she's a single mom. So not only is she trying to do distance learning, but then she also has to teach either my niece or my mom, like, okay, how do I, how do we get my nephew on track and stay on track, and then working with the IEP that's in place, because sometimes, like, she was noticing, like, they would take breaks 15 minutes. She goes, I can't do 15 minutes because I lose him. He won't come back on. And they had to readjust. So,
well, you could get an amendment to an IEP, and I would think probably everybody with a distance learning child who has had an IEP for a student who's in the school would want to consider that. And that's something that is, the IEP is a national program. It's federal, and it's part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it is required to be by the government implemented. So parents have a lot of power. I remember when my daughter was in the 11th grade, and I just went into the meeting and I said, hi, I'm Stephanie Davidson, and I'm old and tired. And they said, what would you like, Mrs. Davidson? And I had 3 things that I wanted to be sure that were provided for my daughter, and I got them all. But of course, that was an in-person time. She needed to have an interpreter, and some other things that were going on. So you might need to be completely familiar with what your child's IEP says. So you need to read it more than one time, and then you need to decide what do you think is critical in that IEP that you want to be sure your student gets, because a committee has come up with these ideas that the child needs a certain number of minutes of support. The child needs, maybe fewer questions on a test. Maybe the test needs to be read aloud. And there are some good programs that you can find online to read aloud to your child. So that if you have a high school kid that's reading a book that's too difficult, or even a younger child, you can find ways to have the computer read those books to the children, and that's hugely helpful.
Yes. Even my young one, at the time 3rd and 4th grade, was utilizing those types of programs. So it's not just for even the big ones.
That's correct. That's true. And it can help anybody. And if the child has a book to follow along with, that's even better. But some people just have difficulty reading, and there are many, many successful people who are not excellent readers. And so we have to figure out how to get around that for a student to receive an appropriate education.
So what kind of tools can a parent use to make sure that, or to use that would work for their kid, depending on what their IEP says?
Well, parents need to talk with the actual teacher who would work with their child. And you have to insist on that. I need to speak to Mrs. Smith because Susie Q is not doing well, and you have a relationship. But again, like Shea was saying earlier, we want to be polite, thoughtful, and kind, because the teachers are losing their minds just like parents are. I mean, this is just
With all this distance, the distance learning, I mean, with this pandemic cooties, it's crazy for everybody, not just, the students and parents.
Yes. So to me, communication is the number one most important thing. Every parent should have a copy of his or her child's IEP because it's given to them after the meeting. You should have it at home, filed somewhere. If you can't find it, and that often can be the case, you can request a copy, and the school is, supposed to provide that for you, and they will, I'm sure.
Okay.
In a child's special education state folder, and they can get a copy of it and get it to you if you can't locate the one that was given to you.
And if that doesn't happen in a timely manner, from the time you request it, just Call again.
Lightly keep calling. Yes. Oh, it's that Mrs. Davidson again. She'll never shut up. I'm just going to stop and do that right now.
Right.
And you don't want to be ugly about it, but you know, it is because they're overwhelmed too. We all are. Everybody's overwhelmed. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to go. But you do need to be able to see what is in that IEP and what you think is possible for you at home to do with the student, and what the special education staff needs to do to help you, to support you as the home teacher, because that's what's happening.
So how long does a district have though? Like, say you like a good example would be my sister. My nephew had to go to summer school and she realized I need to change things for him with this distance learning. How do they make that amendment that you mentioned and making sure that it's followed through?
Well, to make the amendment, you need to have some of the components of the IEP committee available to talk about it. It doesn't have to be the whole committee, but the committee consists of an administrator and a general ed teacher, a special ed teacher, and the parent. That's the minimum number of people that would be on the committee.
Okay.
And very often the diagnostician sits in on those, certainly when the child has been recently tested. So, but you can talk with the teacher who would be implementing it in a personal setting and kind of decide what you think is right and reasonable for the distance learning. So again, you've got to be able to talk to that teacher. And I would imagine that the teachers would be willing to talk to you all too.
Right. And then do they also communicate that to my students' other teachers to make sure
Yes,
that this
yes,
is
it is required by, that's a good question. It is required by law for the general education teacher to have a copy of the student's IEP, because very, very often, like 99.9% of the time, they are implementing some of those guidelines themselves. Such as, like you said, gets a break every 15 minutes, the student gets a break. Or the student should not be cold called because it would embarrass him. Or the student should only do the even problems on math because, 30 problems are too many, so only 15 for the student. Or everything should be read aloud to the student. Or instead of 4 answer choices, only 3 for the student. I mean, there's a myriad of, the word is escaping me, I've gotten old now. Oh gosh, what is that word? Geez, I can't remember it. Anyway, things that are in the IEP that be followed, that have been chosen according to that student's individual specific needs in order to be successful.
right. And I think that's what a lot of parents are worried about because, with this distance learning, this is totally new. Some kids did not grasp, the distance learning, and they're trying to figure out what to do and how to accommodate their child. That's why I think a lot of parents are pushing for actually in person instead of the distance learning.
I can understand that, yeah. Yeah, every state has standards because that was part of No Child Left Behind and then Race to the Top in the federal government. And in Texas, we call them the TEKS, and they're Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And students have to be able to do certain things. And some of those are super important, and some of them are less important. And I certainly would suggest just working on the super important things for a special education student and not trying to hit every area. Because if they can just get the basics,
Right.
that will ensure that they're ready to go on to the next level.
Right. And so for this amendment, would you recommend trying to get an amendment prior to school starting or once school is back in session? That's a good question.
Well, it is a good question. And a lot of it depends on exactly what is in your student's IEP. If you think that you and the teacher think that it can be provided for them the way it's written, then you don't need an immediate amendment. But if you know that that's not going to work for you at home and that the teacher's not going to be able to provide, say, 75 minutes a day just to your student, timing is one of the main components of an IEP, how much time of services a student receives. But it can be amended at any time. And any time a parent requests, it's the law that you have to do that.
So you said it's the law to do that. So here's my question. If me as a parent, and I had a parent that's now actually made a comment, says it's hard to implement an IEP that was written with a classroom context. in mind. And I think the question would be is, you know, if they're not following through, what is a step to a parent to make sure that's actually followed through? Do I need to make an extra step, you know, maybe give them something to the school to make sure, or do I need to send something to the Texas Education Agency to make sure they're following? I know we're not trying to be mean, but they are.
I don't think you get much of a response at this point, because they're, you know.
We're just trying to.
It's probably, if your child is in distance learning, the child should see the special education teacher on the computer. And so you want to be sure that that teacher is checking in with the child.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that teacher will help you get onto the program you need to read to the child.
Okay.
Or maybe that, you know, that teacher will show the child how to do a math problem, perhaps in a different way than the classroom teacher, and you as the parent can watch and then help your student practice with that. The difficulty becomes when parents are trying to work from home, but are still having to be the teacher of their child. That's why only those very most important areas should be targeted, in my humble opinion. And I certainly don't know everything, but you know, we just need to get to the basics to make sure students are moving forward.
So what if you have, for instance, you have to work outside the house?
That's going to be my next question.
How do you need to have maybe a meeting with the teacher, yourself, and the person who's actually helping at home to be that?
I think that would be exactly what you should do. If you have another person helping at home, that
Right.
person needs to be exactly aware of what to expect.
Kind of
And you
like
might, yeah, and you might try to ask the teacher if you could meet with her in the evening. Most teachers are willing to do that. I'm working for a nonprofit right now, part-time, and they've asked us if we could work with our students later, you know, way after school times, just because some homes will only have one device, but more than one child.
Right. Very true.
So, you know, this is just a time when we're all trying to give a little more. So you might ask that, if you know, could I meet with you every other Monday evening for 15 minutes or something like that? And certainly I don't think the teacher would be required to meet after hours, but most of us do this because of the love that we have for our children and the desire we have to make sure they're getting what they need to be responsible adults. So I think that you will probably, if you are kind and you know, appreciative, you'll get a lot more from your district and from your specific teacher, but you must have a relationship with that teacher.
I agree. And then do you have any tips like for parents who are able to work from home and have their child there with them, like how to fit their day? Like a good example, I know there's a lot of challenges out there, maybe an example for a child with autism.
A lot of children cannot sit in a desk all day. We have never done a good job, in my opinion, of educating boys. You know, they have a lot more energy than, there's a private school here in Houston that I know of where boys are not required to sit. And they don't have to raise their hand. They can just call out the answer, and they're so successful there. Right. And a friend of mine is a special education teacher in one of the big districts here in the Houston area. And she has two boys that just blossomed with distance learning because they didn't have to sit down.
That's true.
They could be moving around, but listening to what she was asking them to do. So know your child. And, you know, a child should not have to sit in front of a computer screen, I wouldn't think any longer than half an hour at a time. They need to have breaks. And if they need to eat, let them eat. If they need to go to the bathroom, you know, which is a major thing in a classroom, they can just get up and go.
Right.
And all of those things make it, a little bit less formal and a little bit less scary. Mm-hmm. and a little bit more doable. So it just depends on how your special education staff is planning to support. And I think that they probably will use Zoom or some of the other programs that are like Zoom. I know they're using Teams and HISD. Mm-hmm. The parents are going to have a Teams login. And so all of the support people will be using that as well, but it's similar to Zoom, but something like that so that you can stay in touch. Because if you have a high school student and you're going off to work, you're just going to have to hope, I think, that the student is doing what needs to be done. And my thing is, if the state of Texas considers you to be a child until you're 18, mm-hmm. and so just call up the high school teacher too, you know, because you need to, as the parent, you have to take a little bit more responsibility during this time to make sure your student is doing what is required of him or her.
Right. And I think too, maybe we need to, especially if you haven't had your kid home learning, right, until March or April, you need to think outside of the box as to what learning looks like. They don't necessarily have to sit at the kitchen table to learn, right? Or at a desk.
Sit on their bed with their computer in their lap. Sure can.
Yeah.
Sit in the backyard.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Sit on the trampoline, read the book, make a fort, a pillow fort, and under your mouth under the pillow fort. You know.
Anytime learning can be fun. Yes, that's much better. And I think that we're going to see a difference this fall because it won't be as, nobody knew this was coming. I remember being in my classroom with my students that I do just short intervention time with on a Thursday. And they said, okay, well, next week is spring break. When you come back, we're going to take everybody's temperature. And by the end of that day, they had closed on Friday. It was just so fast. And teachers didn't have their supplies. They didn't have what they needed at home.
Right.
Everybody was in shock and nobody knew what to think. And now that we've had some time, and I know that administrators have been spending countless hours trying to prepare and work with their staffs. I know that to be true. And so I think that there'll be a little bit more organization and parents will be grateful for that.
Yeah. If there's a special education teacher watching, do you have any tips or ideas on how they can help with the IEP? I know that was not a prepared question. I just thought of it.
Special education teachers know their students. I knew exactly what Wendy's niece needed. I knew her like the back of my hand because I worked with her every day and I knew what she could do and I knew what she had difficulty doing. And we always write our goals and objectives, that's what I could remember, to the strengths of the student. We always do that. And it's written, how much time a student will have and the setting where the student will be and who will provide the services and what the outcome should be. And so that teacher will know that student. And usually special ed students teachers move up with their students. It's not like you have Miss Smith for first grade and Miss Jones for second grade. It's not like that. Usually you have the same teacher for a while. And in those very younger grades, I don't know exactly how that'll work. We had kindergartners last year and we're not going to support kindergarten this year in my work because, they haven't even been to school yet.
Right.
But they progress. And I know in elementary schools, they have K, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5 as a different teacher. But teachers know each other and know these students. And then you get information from the students' testing, which is done every 3 years. And the special education teacher can look at that. And it's called the FIE. And it's a full and independent evaluation that's done of each child.
Okay.
And that gives all the strengths and all the areas of weakness that every child has. And we all have learning weaknesses, everybody.
Right.
And so these are just specifically listed because they've had this professional test them. And it gives the teacher, the special education teacher, a world of information and how best help each child. And we all have those as special ed teachers, and we all are asked to read them and know exactly what we're working with. And the parent should have a copy of that also, of the child's state testing in every state. That's a national law.
Gotcha. And I know when we worked together with my niece, you were a blessing. You're an angel, not only, helping her, but you helped me and my sister with tools. Now, you had to educate us on the tools of what to do at home because we weren't familiar with these types of tools. I mean, my niece she's dyslexic. So I was learning as I was going. So do you have any advice on parents, like what questions they should be asking their child's, teacher when they're going through the IEP? Like, do you have anything that I can do at home?
Yes, you ask the teacher that, and the teacher certainly should be able to give you some ideas. For example, a child who's having trouble with reading comprehension while you're cooking supper, the child can read one paragraph and the parent can ask a question from that one paragraph. And then move on to the next one. That's easy to do while you're doing something else at the same time.
Right.
Or you can practice math facts and sing them anytime you sing, it's easier to learn.
That's so true.
Or jump rope, to learn things like that.
I have a comment here by a parent. Her name is Leanne Lemon. I hope I pronounced your name right. She's stating that her big worry is that teachers are expecting them to be on camera with students. I'm assuming like all the time. How can a parent communicate that with their teacher? Like, because they're losing them on the camera, like they can't stay on the computer.
Or maybe that makes them subconscious, right? It could be that makes them subconscious, and so it's like being called on almost.
Yeah,
almost. Except that if you have a small group and you're just with the teacher, I think that's something that students are going to have to work to overcome, because it's very difficult to work with a child if you're not making eye contact. I mean that's a huge worry about mask wearing for teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Not getting any facial cues, and we all use those socialization cues by looking at the teacher's face. Oh, she's proud of me. Look, she's smiling. She's confused by what I asked. I mean, so I think that we just have to work with our students. Maybe you can get your student a cute new T-shirt and have a nice place set up, and maybe alert the teacher that, my son is embarrassed to be on camera with you, and have the teacher know that ahead of time, so she can say, oh, Johnny, I'm so glad to see you. I've missed you this year. I'm so happy to meet you, or whatever the need is to make that connection, because it's all about connecting. My motto that I got from the Israeli author Avi is that if you can convince your children that you love them, there isn't anything you can't teach them. And I think that's what most teachers strive to do, we love our children. We love our work. It's not a job, it's a calling. And so
that's very true.
really is, because nobody's in it for the money. I'm here to tell you that.
That's true too.
One thing I have heard, and I've heard some concern over, is there are some lawmakers looking at, right now we have, is it a 7-hour a day, bum in the seat requirement? Something like that for the average student. And what they're looking at doing is a 4-hour live with your teacher requirement. That is not across the board yet, but I know I'm hearing murmurings of that as a amendment through the State House. So maybe that's what she's talking about too, is I don't know if you can sit in front of a computer for 4 hours.
Probably a special education child can't, so that could be part of the amendment. My son will sit 40 minutes of every hour, or whatever you and the teacher and the administrator think is reasonable,
Right.
for that child. And he will complete the work. He will complete, 70% of the work, or however the child is able to do according to his individual needs. But certainly, kindergartners can't sit for 2 seconds. They've got,
That's true.
it's going to be insane. So, but that's certain, and the amendment is not as big it's just a 1 page in Texas, and I'm sure it's similar to that other state. This is the amendment to this IEP. You sign it. It's not all that other stuff reiterating. It just goes at the back of the paperwork.
And so how do they get that? You're saying an amendment. So is it a form that the school gives you? Or
School write it. It's part of the IEP. Okay. So all the IEPs are online now. So depending on what program your district uses.
Mm-hmm. So it's easy to go click, here we go, then I can submit the amendment, and this is what I require. And then I also can request a call with the teacher to discuss these amendments.
Well, the amendments will be done with the parent and the teacher, and maybe another person on the committee, or maybe just the parent and the teacher will talk about it. The teacher will probably write it. It depends on if you have a compliance specialist who does the paperwork, like we do in the charter school where I was working, or if the actual classroom teacher writes the IEPs, which I have done a million of. A lot of classroom teachers do their own IEPs, so it depends on how that works. But if it's a compliance specialist, the teacher and the parent can talk about what they think is appropriate for the child. And if the administrator is interested in being involved, pull the administrator in, and then the compliance specialist can type it up.
Okay, so you don't necessarily have to go in front of an entire board.
No. Not for
The first step would just be talking to your teacher, right?
Always the first step. Keep that line of communication going. Yes.
So I have the same mom that's asking, should we kick off asking for those amendments now or wait a few weeks?
Depends on what your personal IEP says. If your IEP says, my student will have 90 minutes a day in the special education setting, and that's not going to happen, you probably want to amend it now. So so much depends on what your district is doing. And I know some people are just now making the decision if they're going to go in person or not in person. I mean, everybody's completely different because of this pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just be aware of your rights, and that you don't have to do exactly what it says in that IEP that was written for in-person learning.
And if a parent wants to really understand their rights and know what they are, is there an outside resource for them to go to?
TEA has some excellent resources on what your rights are as parents. They sure do. You just have to click around so you can get to those, but they should be given at every IEP a copy of those.
And if you lost it, you can ask.
If you lost it, you can find it online. Yep, you can ask for another one. Yep, but they're definitely online. What your rights are as a parent.
Gotcha.
And you can't have just anything you want. You can't say, well, I would like my child to have 4 hours one-on-one with Miss Smith while I go get my nails done. You can't do that, even though you might want to. But certainly do something reasonable. I mean, if you think your child is not learning and not understanding what's happening and needs more support, let the teacher know that.
Right. Yeah, a good example that we were talking about with me and my sister was we had to shorten his breaks because he wouldn't be able to come back and concentrate. So they were thinking it was a 15-minute break. So they changed it to where, okay, let's try, for a 5-minute break just for him to kind of get.
Then
his brain is not completely off the subject.
Right.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Right. And some teachers are going to recognize that as well. I've been teaching, Scouts online since April. And some of my classes, I know I can do a 15-minute break every hour. And then some of them I'm watching them going, okay, no, this class needs, a lot more 5-minute breaks.
Exactly. Group dynamics is a very real entity. One child can really change the makeup of a group. And I don't know exactly, again, how the SPED students will be supported.
Right. So if you start to hear, okay, this is the schedule of the day or how our weeks are going to work, whatever, and you don't have an IEP, but that may not work for your child, what do you do?
Well, you have to make a parent request for testing, and there's probably a list of parents who have done that. There usually is, and there's a lot of, you need to talk with the administration on that one.
So is that somebody like a special education director or teacher? Mm-hmm. Is that what you're referring to?
Sure, I'm thinking the special education director or even the principal. You can start with the principal, and I think my child, it might be dyslexic because she gets letters backwards and she is not reading very well and she's behind 2 years. Kindergarten and first grade, they're not going to do a lot of that. They usually wait on some, because children learn here in the United States, we require every child to learn to read at age 5.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are not ready. It's a developmental readiness. And so some people pick it up much later. And so we usually don't do full blown testing on very young children, give them a chance to develop.
So is that even communicated? Because I didn't, I'm thinking of my granddaughter. So if I'm worried about that part, I mean, does the school say, if they're going through the pre-K program and they're noticing this about their child, do they say, normally this is what happens and we kind of, do they communicate that type of information?
Well, they should, but I mean, it's just, your little granddaughter's 3. It's way too young to know if there's anything going on because everybody develops differently.
Mm-hmm.
Right, my daughter didn't learn to read till she was 8 and she's a voracious reader.
Yeah, so if you ask for an IEP and or even an amendment and they say, well, that's going to take 2 months, whatever, sorry, it's going to take a long time. We have this long list of people, we have, because of the pandemic, these issues, whatever it is. Is there another way outside of the district for people to have their kids tested?
Well, you can pay a private entity, somebody in the private sector, to test your child, or you can get an advocate. Many parents get an advocate, and then you look online for, advocates for children who have special needs. But those things cost. And
Oh,
it's
so
not
there's no federal funding outside of the school.
no, because the schools have well-trained people to do that job, and hopefully it wouldn't take 2 months. An amendment should take 30 minutes if you already have an IEP. But you have to go through the response to intervention process before they'll test it. So that's a national thing too, where they have to try certain things. Like perhaps the child, I'm an interventionist in HISD through a nonprofit, and I'm giving extra time and attention to children who are not where their peers are as far as learning to read. And so that's documented. All right, this child went for 30 minutes twice a week for a year, and they still don't know all the letters of the alphabet. So that's the first thing that happens, is a response to intervention. And how they're handling that, I'm not exactly sure either, but I mean, I'll be providing that intervention online, and so a district might be. So they have to do certain things to make sure that they have tried all these things, and then they'll test your child.
Wow. That's a process that they have to go
It is a process. It is. And usually through response to intervention, a lot of progress can be made. So, because so many people are saying, well, my child can't do this or that. And they, and teachers were saying, I don't know what I'm doing here. So that became something many years ago that they decided to put in the process. It's called RTI. If you hear that, response to intervention, that's what it is. So they try as many things as they can think of, to work with the child before testing.
That's good. So if they are going to go to a third party for whatever reason, whether it's waiting time, maybe they didn't trust what they heard from the school for some reason.
Or a second opinion.
Right, or a second opinion, just to, sometimes you need a second opinion. Just like if you're hurt your head, you go to a second neurologist to find out if you really want surgery, right?
Right. What are the type of questions?
Yeah, what kind of questions are there,
Parents should be asking.
companies out there that are just stellar, or is they're just questions you should ask to kind of vet them?
I would look to see if they have, word of mouth is often a good way to find things out. Find out if there are any reviews on Yelp or any of those kinds of things that would allow you to know how the people who've used that particular psychologist have felt about him or her.
I think what was great was there is a lot of parents that have formed Facebook groups that have, like, I'm part of the dyslexia moms group, I'm part of the autism. A lot of times I will go in there and say, hey, do you have any suggestions on this? And I think one of them was a big help was the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates. I had to think about it. Which, if you needed an advocate, they had resources on their website. They had, all kinds of, if you needed an attorney or however. But parents were, like you said, word of mouth was a great resource that I found. And I learned how to find all of these different organizations that help. Some don't cost on front, and some do, or they provide resources. So I think that's a really great one. Do you have any maybe some resources that parents can find that's good to follow just to stay in the know?
No, I don't, because I've been out of it for so long. My daughter's 40, and there was no internet when she was coming along, and I just worked really with the school. But I know that certainly you can even Google parent resources for autism, parent resources for learning disability, parent resources for dyslexia. Here in the Houston area, we have the Nyhouse Center, and they do outstanding work for dyslexic children, and they've trained me and many, many others who are working with students.
And that's something that a parent can go to?
Well, you certainly can look up and see all the huge variety of programs that they have.
Yeah,
they don't need to work specifically with students, but they have lots of resources.
Because I know there's the ARC. I think I'm saying that right. They're another organization that I found that I was able to find resources, or sometimes those organizations can direct you to other either people or other organizations that can help you, especially if you're a single mom that doesn't have much money to get, they want to get a second opinion, want to get their kid tested, but they don't have the money to pay for that. Where can they go?
Now, if your child has had a full battery of testing, either the Wechsler test for children or Stanford Binet or one of the main tests that gives you an IQ, they generally won't give you another test in a 3-year period, but you might get a different interpretation of the scores.
Oh, so that's good to know.
Give you the same test again, yeah, because you might do better. Maybe you talked about it to your mother, you know. And yeah, so.
For the most part, if they go to these third parties or other resources and bring it back to a school district, how receptive is a teacher or a school district to
Those
you
third
doing
parties.
No, I mean, certainly if you go in and say, I had my child tested and my child was given a test, here are the results, here are the recommendations, the school is bound to look at that and go from there. They certainly
We'll review the results.
yeah, review what the information and see that if the guidances that were, given by that psychologist play out well with what they know about your child.
Right. And what their capabilities are as well, right?
If it's reasonable or not reasonable, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because also there's the 504. I don't know if all parents are familiar with that. The 504 is accommodations for your child that don't require a lot of money. My granddaughter had that because she had terrible handwriting, and she wanted to be able to type her answers on the computer. So she had a 504 that said, Victoria can type all answers to questions for tests on the computer. And that did cost nothing, but it was a legal binding document, as is the IEP. And there are lots of different accommodations that can be given through the 504 process that will help a student be more successful.
And I think that's the confusion. So, because I know when my niece was going through this, I didn't know the difference between an IEP and a 504. So how does a parent know? I mean, I know you're communicating that, but what's really the true difference between the two? Because you mentioned funding, like there's not much money in that. So can you kind of explain the two a little bit more?
Sure, there's a lot of federal funding for special education that goes to the campuses.
Okay.
Okay. A child who has had a test with a diagnostician and has met the requirements as a student with, and they have boxes that you can check on the IEP paperwork. A student with autism, a student with deafness, a student who is blind, a student who is learning disabled, a student who is emotionally disturbed. There's many, many categories in which a student can qualify.
Right.
That student is considered special education.
Okay.
Student who qualifies for special education, and then can have a special education support teacher working with him or her. The 504s can be implemented by the classroom teacher.
Okay.
And so you don't need to go out of the classroom. You don't have anybody coming in. It's just something that makes learning a little bit easier for your student. And there's usually someone on the campus, and that also goes through response to intervention, but a lot of the interventions that are tried will then be written in the 504. This child this child can only focus for 15 minutes. And so that can be part of a 504. Or this child needs a pencil grip every time he's writing. I mean, there's just a zillion things, small things that can help a child be successful.
So do a lot of teachers, do you think, maybe start with a 504? Let's see.
Well, the teachers don't, it's not, it goes through the RTI team and then is written by the 504 team and then presented to the teacher.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
so they
that's
still have to request a 504.
Yeah, teachers are busy, trying to teach everybody, and they're happy to do what is necessary for their special students, but they're not involved in writing those generally. They might suggest what they think would work, but someone else will do that on the campus.
Yeah, because I know it helped with my niece. Not only was she dyslexic, she had Erlin's, and so she had an overlay over her work. So they made sure that all the teachers were communicated that, hey, look, if you're going to give this student the work, it needs to be, let's say it's blue, print it on blue paper to accommodate that student.
Yes, to keep the light from bouncing off it, so it was easier for her to see it.
Yeah, so I think that's where the teachers are working with them to making sure that it's accommodated. I think it's, and then too, when like if I notice a teacher didn't do something, like my niece would come home and say, hey, I got this on white paper, I didn't get my blue paper, we had to go back to the school, and I would tell Miss Davidson, and Miss Davidson, all of a sudden the teacher is helping my niece.
Right. Sometimes they forget.
Simple terms.
Right. Yes. Special education teachers are often strong advocates for the students they support.
And it's very true. They do support them.
And some schools have resource rooms where the kids will go and work just with the special education teacher. Some have the situation where the teacher goes out into the regular classroom. But I don't see that as being part of distance learning.
You think that would be possible in distance learning, where maybe the parent can
possible if you have the staff.
Yeah, sure. One-on-one with my student needs one-on-one.
Right. I mean, like if there are 5 kids, like that, when I went into the classrooms, I would ask them to co-locate all the 9th grade English students in the class, and then I would sit at a table with them and make sure they were writing things down. And if I thought what the teacher was asking them to do was too much, then I would ask her to let me modify it for them or accommodate it in some way. To accommodate is just to make a small change, and to modify is to actually change the assignment. So those are 2 different things.
That's a good to know.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot on the teacher's plate as far as reaching every child. And so the special education support teacher is able to help the general ed teacher. And I've been both all over the country. So I know how it feels on both ends of that stick.
Well, I think it's been amazing. I think it's very full of information for our parents to digest and go, okay, I think I have some tasks as a parent, and to first go and communicate with my child's teacher and be a partner with them, right?
Yes.
More than
all parents. We want those parents to be with us. We want them to work in tandem with us so that we know how things are going, and they can tell us, my child was frustrated. He could not do this assignment. We need to work on making this, easier for him. And then the 2 can work together to find something that is more appropriate. Like I used to go to the library back when you could go in one and get some elementary books on a subject that the children might be learning in high school, because I had a student who loved to learn and wanted to participate but could not read the material at a high school level. And that's a pretty easy thing to do. So I'd get a book on a lot. When I remember we were doing U.S. history, and I got 2 or 3 different books that put it in simpler language but the same concepts.
Right.
There's just a million things that can be done to help kids, and we really do want to do all that we possibly can.
Right.
And I think that's the key, is it's like knowing your students, knowing your child, knowing what they can and cannot do, and seeing where they need that extra help. But the key is to communication with the school and making sure that they'll work together for the child.
Absolutely. We want to avoid frustration. We don't want our children to think they can't. We want them to know all the things they can do. Because there are.
It's especially crazy right now with all of the, the COVID cooties going on right now. And then, like you mentioned, that there are students that have to be, that need that in-person instruction, and they're, worried about, are they going to, how can they do the distance learning? Or what if the school shuts down? What if this happens again and all of a sudden the state shuts down, no more school? We're going to have to route to distance learning. So I think the big key is really, as the parent had mentioned on the comment, is if you know your student, you're worried and you want to do an amendment to your IEP, I would say do that now, so you're ahead of anything. And then, like Ms. Davidson mentioned, if you're, you notice something different, you go back in and you communicate what you want change for your child, because you are your child's first teacher.
That's right. Your child comes first.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. And we want them all to do well and prosper, and hopefully this will be over sometime during this school year, at least to the point that we feel like we can safely get back in. And it may look different, but we all want to be there. We know that students learn best when we are with them. We know that. We just are frightened as educators ourselves to get, this disease, which is so serious. Or can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And some kids have found, or some parents have found, their kid is thriving with distance learning, and then trying to figure out, okay, maybe this actually works better for them. So how do we either continue this or figure that out? So that'll be very interesting in the near future to figure out what people are going to do.
It will be. It sure will be. It'll be interesting to see how each district does it differently and who has the most success. And it's a time for real sharing of ideas and encouraging one another.
That's very true. And I think you mentioned, so we can backtrack a little bit for parents. You mentioned, like, if they want to do an amendment, they should go back to their child's district website. Now, are we saying probably specifically under, try to find where their IEP amendment can find, I think the question is, where do I find that IEP amendment?
Well, you don't need to find it because the teacher will do it. You need to tell the teacher, I don't think this portion of this particular goal and objective is going to work for my child on distance learning. Can we do an amendment? And the teacher will do it.
Okay.
Special education teacher will do the amendment.
Yeah, because I had a parent that's actually making a comment about that.
It's so personal, just depending on what your child's IEP says, again. Mm-hmm. But the amendment is not a big deal, and it just makes it, if you see something that your child's not going to be able to do, or wait and see how it's going.
Yeah, that's true. I know my sister did that with my nephew. She had to make some changes because she noticed it in summer school. So she got a taste of distance, more of the distance learning than she did in the fall, because I think in the spring it was packets, and now that the school had time to really go over what they're going to do for the fall, my nephew was in summer school and she noticed that. So I think it's really knowing what your kid needs and communicate that as early as possible with your child's teacher.
Right. How old is your nephew?
9.
9. Okay. 3rd grade.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So yeah, it's I'm learning as well with her, because she'll ask me questions, and sometimes it's like, I don't know the answer because I'm not a specialist in that. Let me find out. Let's see, we can find somebody that can help answer, because sometimes I think parents either want to hear another parent's what they're going through and feeling that, hey, I'm doing the right thing. And then sometimes they do want to go to somebody of expertise to kind of guide them and say, yes, you're doing the right thing. Or here's some resources that you can follow to help. I know it feels better talking to other parents. So I would actually encourage joining those parent groups on Facebook, because they're all out there. Like I mentioned, I'm part of Houston's dyslexia group on Facebook. There's an autism group. And ask those questions, because those parents, can really help you answer or even guide you to information that you're looking for. We're not experts, but we're experts for our kids.
That's exactly right. You're the number one advocate for your child. And, I've been retired now for a year, and all the things that I'm telling folks are things that I experienced as a teacher and as a parent. But this is Facebook. This is not TEA. So, take everything that I'm saying as someone who wants to tell you what she knows, but not as, the gospel, shall we say.
Sometimes we do, because I know I even had a glossary of words, because like you mentioned, RTI, every time I would hear these words, I always have to write it down so I remember what they mean. So that was one tool that I used as a parent, especially when I was new to, like, with my niece having dyslexia. I was like, okay, this is all new to me. How do I do this, and what do I do? And I kept notes of, like, anything that my niece's teacher, like Miss Davidson, was always telling me, okay, I got to remember this. I got to make sure when she comes home, we do this. You know, that was like the environment at home, making sure the tools that the teacher provided to make sure I'm following that. And, you know, just checking in with, you know, my niece to make sure she was okay, that she understood everything. Because I know it's a struggle for kids when they don't understand what's going on with them. They think something's wrong.
Right, and they don't want to admit it.
Yeah.
They don't want to admit that they don't understand. And so very often when you get an attitude from a child, it's because he or she feels that they don't get it, and they don't want you to know that. And so that's, again, where the relationship comes from.
Yeah.
I'm here to help you. I'm your advocate. We're going to start right where you are, buddy, and we're going to move you on.
And that's how I felt with you. You were our angel. You guided us, you helped us, you supported us. You supported actually all my nieces and nephews, and even helped my son when he needed just a little bit of help.
He was beyond me. Physics, no thanks.
Yeah, some of it was beyond.
Cool.
But I do want to thank you so much for coming on the show and explaining everything to us, and then giving guidance and some tips, and, you know, letting parents know they're not alone. Teachers are there for the students. They're the support system. And then what to do if, you know, they come a block in between, if they're not agreeing, you know. So I do appreciate everything you had told us today.
Well, you're certainly welcome. Thank you for thinking of me. I enjoyed it. It was so nice to meet you, Shea, and nice to be able to just talk about what I love, which is educating children.
And I think for next week on Monday, we're going to be talking more about resources that we talked about today. Some of them will probably tip a little bit of what we talked about today, and maybe some other school resources for parents, especially now with distance learning going on. We'd love to share that with you. And if you have any questions, additional questions you would like to ask for Ms. Davidson, you can reach me at wendy@mpuunion.org. I will be placing all this information in the comment field. Or if you have information for Shea, you can reach her.
You can reach me at shay@publicschooloptions.org. That's my email with National Coalition for Public School Options.
And that's information will be put on the comment field, as well as if you have questions about National Parents Union, you can reach us at info@mpuunion.org. We're happy to help that. And I hope we've answered. I know there was a parent that was asking a lot of questions. I do appreciate her making all these comments. Thank you for asking those questions. And I hope you continue to watch our show. And if, like I mentioned, you have any other questions, please reach out to us.
Thanks, everybody.
I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great Thursday. We're going to end the show. And again, we'll post all the information in our comments.
Stay safe, everybody. Bye.
Stay safe. Bye.